Resources, inspiring interviews, business practices, and practical advice to take your art career to the next level. Join Sergio Gomez in today's Artist Next Level and get ready to take control of your career.
Well, hello, my Next Level friends. Welcome to a new episode of the Artist Next Level podcast. I am super happy today because, well, first of all, it's a beautiful morning. And then I'm sitting right in front of Carrie Lannon. And Carrie is going to help us today because she's an expert in branding and consulting. So it's going to be a super conversation. We're going to talk about building a strong artist brand today. So you are in for a treat. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be great. So, Carrie, how are you today?
Fantastic. It's a beautiful day in Chicago.
It is very nice, and the funny story about this is that you and I were supposed to meet for breakfast first and then do the podcast later. Well, it was my fault. I ended up picking a restaurant that doesn't open until an hour later than our meeting time. So now we're doing the podcast first and breakfast later.
Yes, good thing I brought my granola bar.
Yeah, that's right. So this is kind of our warm-up, so we'll be nice and hungry when we get there.
We will, yes.
So, Carrie, I'm super happy that you came here to the podcast, and we are actually here in my studio doing the recording, and we're going to talk about branding, something that I'm super passionate about, something that you are extremely passionate about. You've been teaching about this and working with major brands about it. But before we talk about how the branding for artists is developed and what does that really mean, tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you grew up, how did you get interested in branding, marketing, and so on, and kind of what leads you to what you're doing right now.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I have a background in branding, primarily in lifestyle brands, and that came from really two major jobs. One was I had my own agency, and it was a marketing agency, and our clients were brands like Tiffany & Company and Prada and Louis Vuitton and a lot of luxury brands, where you have to be very, very clear when you're working with them what their brand is. And then my last corporate position is I was head of all the PR for Ulta Beauty. Okay. So I had 800 stores, and I was working with about 500 different brands because the stores carried 500 different brands. Wow. Great brand experience, learning how different companies approach brand and how to stay aligned with their brand.
Okay. And what's your connection with art and artists?
Oh, art is something I'm just simply passionate about, and I actually travel all over the country and Instagram about art. Yeah. When I decided to be a solo consultant, fortunately I was able to obtain quite a few art clients. Okay. I've worked with the Chicago Artists Coalition, the MCA, Chicago Architecture Biennial. I've been fortunate to combine my passion with my skill set.
Very cool. That's great. Now, are you like a Midwest girl, or where did you grow up?
I'm a Detroit girl.
Okay.
I grew up in Detroit, where things are very real, and I like to bring that. Even though I've worked with all these snazzy brands, I think I'm a very practical person, and I'm no baloney. I just want results.
That's right. That's awesome. Well, we're gonna have a conversation about branding for artists, right? And what does that mean? A lot of artists sometimes, when they hear the word branding, already kind of we build sometimes like a barrier, right? Like, branding, that sounds like too businessy, too markety, too I don't know. So maybe it's a good point of departure. What is a brand, and how does that apply to an artist?
Well, the brand is, I always say I do workshops, and I tell people that they already have a brand. We all have a brand. Surprise! Right. Yeah. A brand is the impression we're making on people. Mm-hmm. The difference is for when you're really working on your brand, it's intentionally creating an impression so that people understand you more easily and quickly. Right. It's really, to me, about connecting you and your art with a potential patron, supporter, or customer, client.
Exactly. And would you say now, I guess because social media is such a major component of our daily lives and how we put ourselves, out there, for us as artists, it's so important, because I think, there are thousands of artists in the world today working. Everybody's putting something out, right? How do you distinguish yourself, to others? And maybe you can help me with this analogy that I like to use when it comes to branding. For example, I have two kids, as we talked about earlier, and I can distinguish when one calls me because I understand his voice or her voice, right? There's a specific pitch, a specific way of talking and toning. And I think that's kind of similar to what branding is in a noisy world, isn't it? how we distinguish ourselves from others in the way we put ourselves out there.
Yes, it's really about being thoughtful, and distinguish is a good word. And when I've worked with artists on their brands, I feel like it's a treasure hunt.
Yeah.
They often have so many great points to their background that they didn't even recognize would strengthen their brand.
Okay.
And when they get their brands clear and straight, it makes a lot of things quite easier for them.
Easier, yeah.
Because potential customers can connect with them because they get who they are.
Okay.
I love this saying, if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else.
Right, exactly.
So if you're not clear on who you are, it's very hard for other people to understand who you are and what you stand for in your art.
That's great. So, for artists, clarity is such an important concept, something that
Yes.
we really need to work on.
And when you're clear, the other word that's important is consistency.
Yeah.
And you said something in your podcast I love, which is be seen to be remembered.
Yeah, I say that all the time, yeah.
And I would add to that, be consistent to be memorable.
Oh, I'm going to add that to it. That's for you, and that is awesome.
Yeah, it's that consistency, which isn't that hard when you're being yourself, because none of this is smoke and mirrors. You can't really get away from that with very long anyway. With the digital space, you need to be authentic.
Right.
So it's not something where we're talking about be fake. It's
Right.
just be thoughtful about what you're putting out there about yourself.
Awesome. And I know you have kind of prepared some really great content to kind of share with us today that's practical too, that's going to help us to kind of move forward in that thinking. And maybe even for some of you who might be listening right now, maybe this conversation maybe even become a mindset shift, how you have been thinking about branding or putting yourself out there in a way that now is more cohesive, that it has more direction, and that brings clarity to the viewer.
Yes, I think especially on social media, you will find artists that do their branding very well. And what I'm sure you will see is consistency.
Right.
That starts with they know who they are, they know how they want to represent themselves, and they're consistently showing that. I've seen other artists who I get excited, and I've bought art from artists that I've followed on social media, but I'll start following an artist, and all of a sudden I'll see a picture of their dog, or they're playing tennis, and I think, oh, that's not really why I was following you.
Exactly.
So when it comes to your branding and getting out there digitally, think, especially on social media, why would someone follow you?
Right.
Everything I post, which is about art around the country, I know why people follow me. Right. So I stay with that. I'm not suddenly going to have a picture of me eating a hamburger. So it's a consistency that comes from knowing who you are and what you want to represent.
No, totally understand it. That's great. And I think, what happened, in social media is, we started all kind of with Facebook, right? Facebook was about share everything, and, there was a mix of everything and politics involved in the whole thing, right? Then when Instagram came along, I think a lot of people kind of thought of Instagram the same way they thought of Facebook. And so that's why there's so many mix of things sometimes, where now Instagram has become a platform that's all about the brand. It's all about how we present ourselves. And I think like what you say, I always tell an artist, when you land on somebody's Instagram, you only have like 3 seconds to decide, I'm going to follow this person or not. And if we are not clear on who we are, why, like you say, why would somebody follow us? Yeah.
That's such a good point. I could talk for hours about social media. I ran Alta's social media, so we had about 1 million fans. So there was always all kinds of fun things going on our social channels. But you bring up a good point. I'll say this about social media. I always, again, if I'm advising someone, I think about the brand. So artists, think about your brand and think about whether you can do that social media platform well. Yeah. And if you can't do it well because you may not have the time or the interest, then it's better to have no impression than a bad impression. Right. So just hold off and think. I, for example, use my Facebook for friend stuff.
Yes.
And they're very interested that I'm eating a hamburger, but I don't do that on my Instagram. But I'm very clear on my strategy.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the key word, I think, the strategy. And you're going to help us today with some good strategies.
Yeah.
So why don't we go right into that?
Okay.
I think our friends are ready for it. Can you tell us maybe the next a little bit, before we go into some specific steps, what are some of the benefits of having a distinct brand?
I think there's 2 major benefits, really. One is you start attracting, it's almost like magic. Once you're clear and your image is clear out there, you will start attracting like-minded people because now they get you. They're not having to figure out who you are. And the second is that it will make your marketing much easier because you know what you do and don't want to include.
Right.
I always say sometimes it's as important what you don't include as what you do include.
So it's almost like a filter. You create a filter.
It's a filter. I just worked with an interior design client, and her brand words for the brand impression were so strong that she uses them in their ads, they use them in their social media. It's very easy for her to do marketing because she just looks and says, does this align with my brand?
And maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of the game, but what you want to share, but should, for example, the little bio sentence that we get at the top of the Instagram, that should be aligned exactly to our brand, right? To the message that we want to give.
Yes. I think I was in a meeting yesterday with some artists, and I think even the media sometimes have trouble with how artists talk about themselves because it can be a little esoteric and academic, and that might not be relatable to the general public. So you do want that social media description of yourself to be something people can wrap their heads around.
Right, exactly.
Because the important thing about all of this branding is it's a small window. These are not your friends who've known you over the years, and that's why it's become important. How can I, in a very short amount of time, convey who I am and what I stand for?
Exactly. Excellent. Well, help us out, Carrie, with some of the kind of lessons or
The steps.
key points that you want to help us with today.
All right. There's two things. One, I use the acronym VICT. VICT, and I'll say what that stands for. This is what comprises a brand. First is brand values, that's the V, then the brand impression, then the brand customer experience. What's it like for your customers to buy art from you? I know some artists that have vans and they'll take the art to the location, and some artists won't do that. So what's the customer experience? And finally, for a brand, what's the tone and the voice? So values, impression, customer experience, and tone. That's creating a brand, and that's the first step, is to discover, is what I call it. So.
Now that's great. So I'm hoping, my friend, that you're taking notes right now. And if you're driving, don't do that. Wait until you get home. Go back and listen to the episode again because this is so valuable. So.
I try to make it easy. It's really, it's not rocket science. You know, I want to make it easy. I want artists to understand how this can benefit them. Whether they're doing this on their own or working with someone, I've seen people benefit tremendously from getting clear on their brand.
Can you unpack a little bit each of those components?
Yes, absolutely. So those are the values, impression, customer experience, and tone are what make up your brand. It's what your brand conveys, it's what it looks like, and to get there you have to go through a discovery process. You can even do this on your own. You know, you just think about what are the words that come to your mind on those four categories. You know, what is your, so for example, the impression you make you may want to be controversial. You may want to be thoughtful or soulful. What's that brand impression that you want to give? And then for values, one of your values might be imagination. That might be a really important value to you. Tone, you could be serious, you could be playful. Tone is how you convey your language and your visuals on your digital and how you represent yourself.
And if I could add on that one, I think that's a very important one, the tone.
Yes.
I love that you're talking about that because a lot of times there's so much pressure out there that you feel like you have to become somebody else, you know, in order to be seen or to be, you know, noticed, right? And I've always, you know, talked about this idea of, you know, who you are is your greatest asset. You know, and it took time for me to understand it. You know, I'm an immigrant, so I came from Mexico. My English sometimes, you know, I struggle here and there, and you know, when I understood that actually that's not really my weakness, but what if that's my leverage? You know, this is who I am. You know, no matter what I do, especially when I started doing podcasting, right? I was so afraid the first episodes that, you know, what people are going to say if I mispronounce a word, if I skip you know. But something, right? or if a word comes out as a different one, and that I was so conscious about it. And that was kind of preventing me from succeeding in this manner. But then when I understood, actually, my tone is who I am. It's my asset. It's my distinguishable characteristic from somebody else. And when I owned it, it totally changed, right? Then I started doing video, and then I became comfortable with that. And sometimes something happened, and sometimes the dog started barking, and I'm not gonna edit it. I'm just gonna leave it because this is who I am. This is what happens in my house. People are coming to my breakfast, right? So they're coming with me, and I think when I start owning that, understanding it, then totally everything changed for me. And I think when I talk to artists, when it comes to social media, you don't have to be an extrovert to be effective. You can be an introvert artist and be very effective as well. But you just have to own it and realize that. So maybe,
yes.
Am I in the right track?
It's so you're preaching my gospel here, Sergio. It's so important to be yourself. I think that people are like snowflakes. No two are alike.
Right.
And your greatest power is within yourself. And I think people feel pressure from two areas. One, social media, they think, I need to be like that.
Exactly.
And the second is, I never start with a target market with branding. I don't go, who do you want to sell to? Let's make you into that person that target market wants.
Okay.
I start with, who are you?
So you're
right.
Yeah,
your target market will find you, your customers,
Okay.
your clients will find you, your patrons. They will find you if you are being authentic and being you.
Okay.
Because I worked with a woman who owned a gallery. She wanted to become a curator on an international level. We were talking, and I found out she had lived in 4 countries before she was 27 and spoke several languages. She never thought to put that in her bio. So that's the thing, about the treasure chest, and also that was authentic to her. We didn't have to make a thing up. It was just uncovering all those treasures.
Yeah.
Like your authenticity and your sometimes casualness in what you do is what's so appealing because it's so real.
Right.
We have enough fakery out there. We don't need more of that.
That's awesome. So let's go to the next one. So you talk about impression, brand value, tone, and how about customer experience? What is that one about?
Well, customer experience, I think that's something that we can all get lost in. Most artists are what we call solopreneurs, right? They are entrepreneurs working on their own. And if you're thoughtful about what you want the customer to experience with you, and ahead of time, that's important because that means you may get customer repeat business. Every customer, client is a potential repeat or someone to talk well of you. I think about a woman I followed on Instagram. I bought one of her prints. When it arrived, it had this beautiful note card that she had written on. There was a little button. It was so well thought out. I actually use it when I give talks now as an example of what to do right. But that left such a great impression to me. Yeah. So how do you want your customer to feel after they've interacted and purchased one of your beautiful pieces?
Right. And how that transaction is memorable, right?
Yes.
From anywhere else that they might buy art and I think for many collectors or many people who are not even collectors yet, and they buy their very first original art, we should celebrate that. We should make a big deal as an artist, right?
Yes.
Because in my experience, we do like a small works challenge at the end of the year, and it's all about kind of giving an opportunity to that person who maybe doesn't consider himself or herself a collector, but they've been following you online, and they would love to have something of yours, but they can't afford one of my big paintings, right?
Yes.
So give them this one time of the year this great opportunity to be part of what I do. And I always tell artists, who are joining me on this, that, you have to make it for them just as special as the person who bought the $10,000 painting, right?
Oh, so that is
because
so true.
They have to feel it, right? And they may at this point just afford a $100 little drawing, but you never know their buying power 5 years from now, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're staying on top of mind and they had a great experience with you, in my experience, a lot of people come back and say, Sergio, now I got a big house, now I'm ready for the big one, right?
Yes.
Had I not invested myself in that experience from the very first time when they spent $100 on a little print or something, perhaps that big sale would not have come later.
Yes. And you've talked before about value, that your art is of value, and that art is of value to your customer. And when you acknowledge that and connect with them and let them know how much it means to you, even if it's a 12 by 12 print versus, a wall-size mural, that's just a great experience all around. It's an integrity experience that's good to have.
Exactly. Excellent. Well, let's continue talking about maybe the story. How do we tell our story? How do we create a narrative around ourselves? And a lot of artists sometimes tell me, Sergio, I just don't know. My story is so boring. It's so general. I didn't have like this great upbringing. How do we make the best out of that?
Those are my favorite people to work with.
Awesome. Help us out.
I'm so boring. I have never found that to be true. You have to, if you're working on your own, dig. Okay. Get a friend to interview you. Maybe you have a friend who's a journalist. Yes, someone who's used to asking insightful questions, and you'll start to uncover some things about yourself. And especially with another person, they'll have aha moments, such as, oh, I didn't know that about you. And then you'll realize you are not boring. Exactly. If you're creating art, I doubt that you're boring. So creating that main narrative is important, and from there comes all the other content, the social media website, whatever. But I think getting the narrative down is important.
And on a practical way, once you have a narrative, how do you actually apply it to your daily promotion or postings and things like that? How does that take shape? So let's say, okay, I sit down, say, okay, Carrie told me to sit down and I'll answer these questions. So I did, I got all the answers. So now what do I do with this piece of paper?
Good point. All right. There's several things you can do with that, and it's about using content in different ways. The first thing is you want to have a bio and artist statement. Once you have that clear, that's something that should go on your website if you have one. Shorter versions of that might be applicable for a promotional postcard, or if you're speaking somewhere or making an appearance with your art, often they'll ask you for a bio or an artist statement. So I would say, and a bio and an artist statement are two different things. Bio is your background, how you got to where you are. Artist statement is your vision and the meaning behind your art.
No, I love that. And I think, something that I love about this section that we're talking about here, the story and the narrative, is that, people are attracted to stories. When you think about the only place that you go and you put your phone down and nobody touches is when you're at the movies, right? You don't want to miss the story, right? If you miss one part of the story, that screws up the whole movie, right? So I just find it fascinating how important that is. And I have tested many times in my own career. For example, in my website a few years ago, I said, what if I, I have my bio like usual, for the business part, but what if I just put a tab at the front and I call it my story, and I just tell my story like if I'm telling it to you right now, right? Without the professional lingo, just straight on. My struggles as an artist, what things I have gone through, and how I overcome those. So I did that, and then I tested it with analytics on the page. I tested it for like 6 months. And to my surprise, that was the most visited page in my website. More than news and the things that we think people are visiting. I think because we are attracted to story. And then I said, okay, I'm going to test it on social media. And so, I like to be thoughtful about my posts, but then I made a post in which at the very top of the post, before I wrote anything, I put an emoji first to grab visual attention. And the image was me working in the studio on something. And then I said, my story, in all caps. And then I put, my story, a smaller version for social media, of course. And I had so many comments and people engaged with it. Because I think, sometimes people say, oh, people don't have time to read stuff. Well, if it's not interesting to them, they won't read it. But I think we're all attracted to our stories. And I think, you make a great point of everyone has a story, even when we think our story is not interesting. We all have a story. When you start looking at it, we don't see it because we are living it.
Yes.
But I think such an important part of who we are as artists to tell our story.
And we're attracted to story, and we're attracted to authenticity.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you're just telling your story with no, you're thoughtful about it, but you're being authentic, that really captivates people because we're all searching for that. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there in the world, and we're trying to find our way to really connect on a human level.
Absolutely.
And I know when I go to art shows, I'm so delighted when the artist is there because I can look at the art, but when I have the opportunity to talk to the artist, now I understand the meaning behind it and their journey to get there, and that art becomes even more meaningful to me then.
Right. And, as you're an art collector, right? So you follow artists and so on. Do you have like maybe a little story, since we're talking about stories, of an artist that you found because of a story, or that you felt more connected once you found out the artist's story?
Oh yes, oh gosh, that
maybe
happens.
Maybe it doesn't have to be a specific person, but just kind of in general.
There's two artists that I met through social media, Instagram.
Yeah, that's
and
a perfect example.
One in particular, I just loved her art.
Yeah.
And when I'm out meeting people at all these shows, if I meet an artist I like, the way I stay in touch with them or keep up on is I will follow them on Instagram. Okay. I always ask them, do you have an Instagram feed?
Yes.
And then I can see more of their work. And this artist is based in New York. And I finally, on one of my trips to New York, met her, and we gave each other a hug. And I said, oh, you're my first. She or I said, you're my first Instagram friend I'm meeting, from another city. Yeah. And I've continued to follow her and have one of her pieces, and it's just a great way to get to know an artist. Yeah. And of course, because I'm a branding person, and some of my clients are in the art field, I don't know everything. I love to watch what other artists are doing. They're often doing something very interesting. I met an artist who paints with alcohol ink.
Oh, okay.
And she gets like 2,000 some likes just painting on her Instagram feed because it's a fascinating process.
Right.
Again, she's consistent. You know what to expect.
Yeah. That's totally awesome. That's awesome. Anything else you want to add to this before we move on?
Just the creation part. Think about yourself in this.
Okay.
I think artists are similar to tech people.
Okay.
You're working away in often a closed studio by yourself in your t-shirt covered in paint, and then all of a sudden you have to get out in the world. Yeah. You do have to get out in the world, artists, because you do need to meet people, and it helps to be thoughtful about what you're wearing. I'm not saying be stylish or trendy or any of that. Just be thoughtful, because that can help reinforce what you're about.
Okay. Awesome. Very great. Let's talk about activation. How do we make this real?
Yes.
Activate this in our daily life.
Yeah. I always say that having a great brand and not doing anything with it is like having a great suit or dress sitting in your closet.
Right.
It's really nice. You've discovered yourself. You created your narrative. Now you got to do something with it.
Yeah.
And you have to look at all the different communication channels, I call them. That could be digital, right? Is it going on a website? Is it going to be on social media? Do you have an artist book? Any way that you are communicating with the public, you want to consider, and also consider what you're capable of. Right. I'm always aware for solopreneurs that we only have so much time in the day, so many dollars to spend on assistance. Maybe you have no assistant, so just make sure it's something that you can maintain.
Okay, that's great. And how do you I would advise someone who, let's say an emerging artist who's just starting out, right? And kind of like trying to put their work out there and their brand. What would be some of the kind of key components that will help that person to kind of establish himself or herself in the world?
Well, I start with be clear on your art and why you're making it, and who you're serving and why you're doing it and who you are. Get clear on that. And then the next step is ask yourself, what can I do? And there's lots of things you can do that don't cost a lot of money. Right. For example, all the templates that are out there for websites like Wix or Squarespace.
It's a really beautiful templates there.
Oh, they're beautiful, and you can do that on your own. And I think we can, solopreneurs can get pretty isolated, and I always encourage them, especially if you're beginning, to, get 4 or 5 friends together. Just talk to them about, what do you see when you see my art, and what do you think about this and that. It's good to get other opinions. I do that a lot, even for my own work, because when you're in a vacuum, you only have your opinion, and we're stronger when we get other opinions as well.
No, I think that's a great advice for any emerging artist kind of starting out. Now, let me kind of switch it now to, how about an artist who has been making art for a long time, right? Maybe established artist, but maybe wants to kind of reinvigorate the brand, right? Maybe, let's say in the 80s, 90s was very strong and everybody recognized that artist, but then, sometimes things happen, and let's say the artist had to pull back for some reason or another, or the gallery moved on to other artists and so on, and now the other artist kind of wants to bring back and kind of reinvigorate the brand, right? What are some of the things that artists can do?
Yes, that's a really good point. Most of the clients I work with have one thing in common: change.
Okay.
They need something to change.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why are they coming to me? So for someone that's had an established brand and maybe opted out for a little while, we call that a brand refresh.
Yeah.
But you want to look at, has the art changed?
Okay.
So if the art has changed, then you want to wrap your brand around that visual change, right?
Okay.
If you have changed, again, get back to what have you done that has changed.
Okay.
And then once you're clear on that, then again you activate it and convey it and get it out digitally.
Yeah.
So it's always those steps to me, like
Right.
discover, remember who you are, figure that out now.
Yeah.
Don't rely on the past.
Right.
And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to get out there and do something different. You've done a podcast on creating the small art. Is that what you called
it?
it?
Yeah, the Small Works Artists Challenge.
Which is brilliant. There's things you can do just to draw attention to yourself. That could be being part of a panel discussion, doing something for free, but where you get value in another way, but it gets you out in the public space.
Yeah.
So just really getting out there.
Overcoming those fears, I think, is so important. I think you bring a great point there on fear of sometimes getting out there, and sometimes when we think about the rebranding process or the refresh, as you call it, sometimes it's the fear of the new, because so many artists who they understood the art world in the 80s and the 90s and how it all worked. Now social media came around that completely changed the dynamics for galleries, for artists, for everybody, right? And sometimes there's this fear of the new, how things change so fast, or that's not the world I used to know. And what I always tell artists is, like, we're not going back to the past, right? So we might as well just take courage and say, just gonna embrace it and do it, and not overthink it.
Yes, I feel very strongly about change. Change is my thing, because I just think it's so exciting.
Yeah.
Remember, in your head, that's how you are interpreting change. You can interpret change, as most people do, as fearful, full of fear. Oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna make a mistake. I'm gonna look ridiculous.
Right.
Or you can embrace it with curiosity.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of things, as I've grown in my career, that I think, I don't understand that, I can't keep up with it. But if you approach it with curiosity, like, oh, how do you do a podcast? Oh, how do I do an Instagram?
Exactly.
With curiosity, then you're much more productive.
It eases out the tensions.
It releases, that's well said, releases the
And
tension.
when you think about it, we all as artists in the studio, we take chances every day. I
Yes.
have there a blank piece of paper hanging right behind us. I had to take a chance when I started doing something, right? So by nature, artists, we take chances, but sometimes we forget about that when we go out in the world.
Yes. I know, I love Maya Angelou. I love all her sayings, and one of her sayings is, I'm paraphrasing, but it's about the most important quality anyone can have, even above discipline and creativity, is daring to dare.
No, I love that. That's
Daring
awesome.
to dare, yeah.
Very cool. Well, I have one more last question for you, Carrie, before we wrap it up, because we could stay here talking all morning.
Good.
We can do a whole workshop right now.
And we have
right?
breakfast to get to.
I know. Yeah, we got a breakfast to go now, and it will be open this time. So this question, which I think is also very important, because nowadays there are a lot of artists who do multiple things. I'm a case for that. For example, I do this what we're doing right now, the marketing and helping artists with their careers. I'm also an artist myself. I'm a curator, right? And there are also artists who do multiple things. There may be an artist who, besides the studio practice, maybe also a professor, or may also do 2 or 3 different types of art, right? Mm-hmm. So how would they, wrap around this idea of the brand with multiple components versus, a person who just does painting, for example?
Yes.
Right? What if you do painting, sculpture, and photography, right?
Yes.
What would be an advice for that?
I would say,
so that you don't confuse people around.
I know. I think, well, the what should be consistent in all of those endeavors is your brand values. Those don't change. Okay. And I always like to think of, who am I serving? And you may not think about that as an artist, but it's just a kinder way to think about business than who's going to buy my stuff and how can I make money. It's who am I serving? Okay. And if you think about your brand values and who you're serving, then you go out and look at your different enterprises. Mm-hmm. And like you've done, Sergio, they have different names. Exactly. Right? They have a clear visual logo and brand. Mm-hmm. So those all, at least you're a great example of this, they all underscore your brand values. Right. And who you're serving. You're serving artists. Mm-hmm. You're putting art out into the world through your clients. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say. Okay. Brand values should stay the same. You don't want those to be all of a sudden, well, I value this, but over here I value that. Right.
Yeah. So kind of having that across the board.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And also, I think, when you talk about that, and as I was thinking about that for my own career, over the years, and the different things that I do, there's this analogy of, which everybody says that you put a different hat, right? Like putting the artist hat or the podcaster hat, and I started thinking, well, what if they're not hats? I really don't like the hat analogy, because every time you put a hat, it implies that you're a different personality or a different persona. You're putting on a different character, right? Or you're acting out as somebody else. So what if it's the same person, right? And the same person just does multiple things. So when I think of what I do, here in this podcast, and I think it goes to the authenticity of what you talk about is, well, here I want to be the same person here as the same person that meets me as a curator, or the same person that meets me as doing my art, or the same person that meets me doing something, right? So kind of more about this global brand, this global value of who I am and what I stand for, and then these other things that I do that derive from that idea, versus here I'm this person, here I'm this other person, and here I'm this other. Yeah,
there's a consistent thread, and if you want to see people doing this wrong, you can think about social media and this idea of influencers out there. Okay. And some of those influencers who have been found out to be completely fake because they were creating, they weren't serving anyone, they were creating to get likes. Yes. And that's a slippery slope, because once you start doing that, you lose yourself. And that's why I said before, I never start with the target customer. I start with the person, because you've got to get that clear. That's your foundation. Right. That's think of it as like the cement floor from which you jump off, right? Right. And that has to be strong. And I've always laughed when you find out these influencers aren't anything like what they're saying are. We don't want that for artists. We want them. And artists generally start from a very authentic place, because that's from where they create their art.
Awesome. Love it. Well, my friends, if we don't stop the podcast right now, you're going to start hearing my stomach growling. So we got to go to a breakfast. Carrie, you've been so awesome. You've been so great. This conversation has been so good. Where can our friends find you? On Instagram, of course, and also, the thing that you do with your own brand. Right. Where can our friends find you online? Social media and so on. Great.
Well, this is a good example of brands evolving. We didn't talk about that, but I'll have a new website coming out soon. Okay. But right now they can find, my website is Carrie Lannon, my name, CarrieLannon.com. Okay. And they can reach me through the website or at carrielannon.com.
Okay. And, easy. And on Instagram, it's the same, right?
Easy, at Carrie Lannon.
Yes. Everywhere.
Yes.
Very great. Really cool. Well, Carrie, thanks so much. Thanks so much. We got to do this again. And some of the friends. Actually, my friends, if you are listening to this and if you missed our Breakfast with Sergio episode, make sure you watch that because that's where we're going next. Right. So it better be good, right? Yes. It better be good after breakfast. So thank our friends for being here today. We appreciate your company. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with your friends. That's something that will be so awesome. Will make us so happy as well. Don't forget to give us a review as well. If you have questions, comments, please send it to us. And we would love to hear from you. Thanks again. Have a great day. Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys at the next level.
Check out our website at www.theartistnextlevel.com, where you will find our podcast library, learn about our upcoming webinars, find resources relevant to your career, and much more. Thanks for listening to today's podcast, and we'll see you at the next level.